Bullies cut the quiet girl's hair. 24 hours later, they were begging for forgiveness. Elena Vasquez sat in the back corner of her chemistry class at Riverside High, her long black hair cascading over her textbook like a protective curtain. The afternoon sun filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the periodic table posters that adorned the walls. At 17, she was the kind of student teachers barely noticed. Quiet, focused, and seemingly invisible to the social hierarchy that dominated teenage life. Her olive skin and delicate features would have made her beautiful if anyone had bothered to look past her oversized sweaters and downcast eyes. But Elena preferred it that way. Invisibility was safety in the brutal ecosystem of high school. The chemistry lab smelled of sulfur from the morning's experiments, and Elena found comfort in the familiar scent. Science was predictable, unlike people. Chemical reactions followed rules, equations balanced, and outcomes could be calculated. She traced the molecular structures in her notebook with practiced precision, her handwriting neat and controlled, each letter formed with the same discipline she applied to every aspect of her life. What her classmates didn't know, what she had carefully hidden for years, was that Elena had spent the last 8 years training in Brazilian jiu-jitsu under her uncle Miguel, a former UFC fighter who ran a small gym in the rougher part of town. The gym, called Guerrero's Den, occupied a converted warehouse on the industrial side of the city, where the sounds of traffic mixed with the rhythmic thud of bodies hitting mats. Every evening after school, while her peers were at parties or scrolling through social media, Elena transformed from the meek girl in baggy clothes to a fierce competitor who could submit opponents twice her size. The journey had begun when she was 9, shortly after her father had left. Elena remembered that night vividly, the shouting, the slamming door, her mother's quiet tears. Uncle Miguel had shown up the next day, his scarred hands gentle as he hugged his sister and niece. "Mija," he had said to Elena, using the affectionate term that meant "my daughter, you're going to learn to be strong, not just in body but in spirit." Those first months at the gym had been brutal. Elena's small frame had been thrown around like a rag doll by students twice her age. Her knuckles had bled, her muscles had screamed, and more than once she had cried in the bathroom after practice. But Miguel never let her quit. "Pain is temporary," he would say, helping her ice a particularly nasty bruise. "But the strength you gain from overcoming it lasts forever." Gradually, Elena had discovered she had a natural aptitude for the art. Her small size became an advantage. She was quick, flexible, and could slip out of holds that would trap larger opponents. She learned to read body language, to anticipate movements before they happened, to use an opponent's strength against them. By the time she was 14, she was competing in regional tournaments, often placing in the top 3 of her division. The medals and trophies were hidden in a box under her bed at home. Her mother, Rosa, knew about the training, but had never fully understood it. Rosa worked 2 jobs, days at a medical clinic as a receptionist and evenings cleaning offices, to keep their small apartment and put food on the table. She was too exhausted to question where Elena went every evening, as long as her grades remained high and she stayed out of trouble. The discipline of martial arts had given Elena more than just physical strength. It had taught her patience, strategy, and most importantly, restraint. Violence should always be the last resort, Miguel had drilled into her during their philosophy sessions, which he considered as important as the physical training. A true warrior protects others, never seeks conflict. The greatest victory is the battle you never have to fight. These lessons had served Elena well in navigating the treacherous waters of Riverside High. She had watched other outsiders get crushed by the social machinery of teenage cruelty, but she had managed to remain beneath notice. She moved through the hallways like a ghost, timing her routes to avoid the congregating spots of the popular crowd, eating lunch in quiet corners, never drawing attention to herself. Madison Pierce ruled Riverside High with the casual cruelty that came with privilege. Blonde, wealthy, and surrounded by an entourage of equally vapid followers, she had made tormenting the less fortunate into an art form. Madison's father owned 3 car dealerships in town, and her mother was a former beauty queen who now ran a successful real estate agency. The Pierce family lived in a mansion on Riverside Drive, the street that gave the school its name, in a house with more bathrooms than Elena's apartment had rooms. Madison had been beautiful since birth, or at least that's how she told the story. She had competed in pageants since she was 4, her bedroom lined with crowns and sashes that chronicled her reign through various age categories. But somewhere along the way, the constant competition had curdled something inside her. The need to be the prettiest, the most popular, the most feared had become an addiction. She fed on the admiration of her followers and the fear of her victims with equal hunger. Her lieutenants, Jessica and Chloe, were more than happy to participate in whatever scheme their queen devised. Jessica Chen came from new money. Her parents had made a fortune in tech and desperately wanted to belong to the old money crowd that Madison represented. She had latched onto Madison in freshman year, willing to do anything to maintain her position in the inner circle. Her designer clothes never quite fit right, as if even the expensive fabrics could sense she was playing a role. Chloe Williams was different. She came from a middle-class family, but had been Madison's friend since elementary school, back before the Pierce family had hit it big with their business expansion. She had watched Madison's transformation from a relatively normal child to the monster she had become. But loyalty, or perhaps fear of losing her only claim to social status, kept her by Madison's side. Sometimes, Elena caught glimpses of discomfort on Chloe's face during Madison's crueler moments, but it never lasted long enough to matter. They moved through the hallways like sharks scenting blood, always searching for their next victim. Their heels clicked on the linoleum in perfect synchronization, a warning sound that sent lesser students scurrying for cover. They had a particular talent for finding someone's greatest insecurity and exploiting it with surgical precision. Amy Martinez's acne, David Lim's stutter, Rebecca Jones's second-hand clothes. Nothing was off limits. Elena had managed to avoid their attention for most of her junior year by keeping her head down and her mouth shut. She had perfected the art of being invisible, of becoming part of the background. She ate lunch alone in the library, surrounded by dusty books and the quiet hum of the ancient air conditioning system. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly librarian, had grown so accustomed to Elena's presence that she often forgot she was there, sometimes jumping in surprise when Elena quietly returned a book to the desk. The library was Elena's sanctuary, a place where the social hierarchies of high school held no power. Between the stacks, she could lose herself in other worlds, other lives. She particularly loved the biographies section, reading about people who had overcome tremendous odds to achieve greatness. Maya Angelou, who had been mute for 5 years as a child, but became one of America's greatest voices. Stephen Hawking, whose body betrayed him, but whose mind soared among the stars. These stories reminded her that high school was temporary, that there was a whole world beyond Riverside's walls, where different kinds of strength were valued. Elena's daily routine was carefully calibrated to minimize contact with potential threats. She arrived at school exactly 12 minutes before first period, early enough to avoid the main rush, but late enough that the early arriving overachievers had already dispersed to their various activities. She took routes through less crowded hallways, had memorized which bathrooms were least likely to be occupied during different periods, and knew exactly which teachers would let her eat lunch in their empty classrooms if the library was unavailable. Her wardrobe was deliberately nondescript. Oversized sweaters in muted colors, jeans that were neither too new nor too worn, shoes that made no sound when she walked. She kept her beautiful long hair down, using it as a curtain to hide behind when necessary. She had learned that being forgettable was a survival skill, that the nail that stuck up got hammered down. The first crack in her armor came on a rainy Tuesday morning in late October. The weather had turned suddenly, catching everyone off guard. Students rushed through the main hallway, trying to shake off the rain, creating a chaos of umbrellas, wet shoes, and complaining voices. Elena was rushing to her locker between classes, her usual routes blocked by the crowd of students, trying to avoid the leaking roof in the east corridor. She was moving quickly, perhaps too quickly, her mind on the calculus test she had third period. She rounded the corner by the trophy case, and that's when it happened. Her shoulder connected with something soft, followed by the distinctive sound of a cup hitting the floor and liquid splashing across the linoleum. The hallway seemed to freeze as Elena looked up to see Madison Pierce standing there, her designer white blouse now decorated with a spreading brown stain of expensive coffee. "Watch where you're going, freak!" Madison snapped, her voice carrying across the crowded corridor with the practiced projection of someone used to being heard. Other students stopped to watch, sensing drama like vultures circling a dying animal. The hallway, moments before filled with chatter and movement, fell silent except for the steady drip of rain from someone's umbrella. Elena's mind raced through possible responses, calculating odds like she would in a sparring match. Apologize and move on, the safest option. Stand her ground, dangerous but potentially necessary. Her uncle's voice echoed in her head. Choose your battles wisely. Not every challenge needs to be accepted. "I'm sorry," Elena mumbled, her voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the school. She bent to help clean up the spilled drink, pulling tissues from her backpack. Her hands moved automatically, trying to contain the spreading puddle before it could create more chaos. "Don't touch it with your dirty hands," Jessica interjected, pushing Elena back with enough force to make her stumble. "God knows what diseases you people carry." The racist undertone wasn't lost on Elena, and she felt a familiar fire ignite in her chest. Her family had been in this country for 3 generations, longer than many of the so-called American families in town. Her great-grandfather had fought in World War II, her grandfather in Vietnam. But to people like Jessica, she would always be other, would always be those people. Eleanor's fists clenched involuntarily, her body automatically shifting into a defensive stance before she caught herself. She forced her muscles to relax, her breathing to remain steady. "Walk away," she told herself. "It's not worth it. They're not worth it." But Madison wasn't finished. She had an audience now, and Madison Pierce never missed an opportunity to perform. "Look at this hair," she said, reaching out with perfectly manicured nails to touch Elena's long locks. "When's the last time you washed it?" "It's probably crawling with lice." The comment was so absurd that Elena almost laughed. She washed her hair every morning, used the same expensive conditioner her mother saved up to buy because it was one of the few luxuries they allowed themselves. Her hair was her one vanity, the one thing about her appearance she truly loved. It connected her to her grandmother, who had passed away when Elena was 12, but whose own long, beautiful hair Elena had inherited. Elena jerked away from the touch, fire flashing in her dark eyes for just a moment. It was a break in her carefully maintained facade, a glimpse of the fighter that lived beneath the quiet exterior. Madison caught it immediately, her predator's instincts honing in on this sign of weakness, or what she perceived as weakness. "Oh, the little mouse has some fight in her," Madison laughed, the sound sharp and brittle like breaking glass. "How amusing!" "Did you hear that, girls? The mouse thinks she's a lion." The gathered crowd laughed nervously, the kind of laugh that comes from relief that someone else is the target. Elena recognized several faces, students from her classes, people she had helped with homework, a boy from the chess club she had partnered with for a biology project. None of them met her eyes. From that day forward, Elena became Madison's favorite target. It started small, almost subtle enough to be accidents. Books knocked from her hands in the hallway. "Oops, didn't see you there." Gum mysteriously appearing on her chair in English class. Her locker decorated with crude drawings and racist slurs that the janitor would quietly clean away without reporting. The harassment escalated gradually, like water slowly heating to a boil. Madison had a talent for psychological warfare, for finding exactly the right pressure points to cause maximum damage. She started rumors about Elena's family being illegal immigrants, despite the fact that Elena's family had been citizens for generations. She would make loud comments about taco smell whenever Elena walked by, even though Elena's lunch usually consisted of sandwiches from home or cafeteria food like everyone else. Jessica and Chloe became Madison's eager accomplices, though Elena noticed differences in their approaches. Jessica seemed to genuinely enjoy the cruelty, adding her own creative twists to Madison's schemes. She was the one who started the whisper campaign about Elena's mother being a cleaning lady, technically true, but said with such venom that it became an insult. She would speak in a mocking Spanish accent whenever Elena was within earshot, despite the fact that Elena spoke perfect, unaccented English. Chloe, on the other hand, participated with less enthusiasm. She would join in the laughter, stand by Madison's side during confrontations, but rarely initiated anything herself. Sometimes Elena caught her looking uncomfortable, especially during the more vicious attacks. But whatever conscience Chloe might have had was consistently overruled by her fear of losing her place in the social hierarchy. The teachers at Riverside High existed in their own complicated ecosystem, and most had learned that getting involved in student drama was more trouble than it was worth. Mr. Patterson, the chemistry teacher, was nearing retirement and had long ago stopped seeing anything that might require him to fill out paperwork. Mrs. Robinson, who taught English, was too overwhelmed with her 5 classes of 30-plus students each to notice the subtle warfare being waged in her classroom. Coach Williams was the worst. A former football star whose glory days were decades behind him, he actively encouraged the social Darwinism that played out in his gym classes. When Madison's crew would forget to include Elena in team sports, leaving her standing alone while teams were picked, he would just shrug and say, "Life isn't fair, Vasquez. Better get used to it." The only teacher who seemed to notice something was wrong was Ms. Martinez, the art teacher. Young and idealistic, fresh out of college, she tried to create a safe space in her classroom. She would pair Elena with different students for projects, trying to break down the social barriers. But art was an elective, and Elena only had it twice a week. Ms. Martinez's influence couldn't extend beyond her colorful, paint-splattered classroom. Elena endured it all with silent dignity, even as the harassment began to take its toll. Her grades remained high. She couldn't afford to let them slip, not when college was her only escape route. But the effort required to maintain them while dealing with constant torment was exhausting. She would come home drained, barely able to summon the energy for training. Uncle Miguel noticed the change immediately. "You're not centering yourself," he observed during a sparring session, easily avoiding Elena's half-hearted attempt at a takedown. "Your mind is elsewhere. In a real fight, that distraction will get you hurt." Elena wanted to tell him everything, to let out the frustration and anger that built up inside her every day. But she knew what would happen if she did. Miguel would want to intervene, to confront the school or the girl's parents. It would escalate the situation, make her even more of a target, and worse, it would disappoint him to know that she was being victimized and not defending herself. So she buried it all, pushed it down deep, where it couldn't affect her training. The gym became her outlet, the only place where she could release the rage that built up during the school day. Her sparring partners started commenting on her increased aggression, the new edge to her techniques. Miguel watched with concern, but said nothing, trusting that she would come to him when she was ready. At home, Rosa was too exhausted to notice the subtle changes in her daughter. She would stumble in from her second job after 10 at night, heat up leftovers, and ask the perfunctory questions about school before collapsing into bed. Elena would lie, say everything was fine, that school was good, that she was happy. Rosa would smile tiredly, pat her daughter's hand, and shuffle off to bed, grateful that at least one thing in her life wasn't a crisis. Elena would lie awake in her small bedroom, staring at the ceiling and running through scenarios in her mind. She imagined confronting Madison, using her skills to humble the bully in front of everyone. She visualized Jessica's shocked face as Elena demonstrated just how wrong she was about those people. She pictured Chloe finally standing up to her friends, choosing right over popularity. But then Uncle Miguel's voice would intrude on these fantasies. A warrior's strength comes from protecting the weak, not becoming the oppressor. The moment you use your skills for revenge, rather than defense, you become the very thing you claim to fight against. The philosophy behind martial arts had been as much a part of Elena's training as the physical techniques. Miguel had made her read The Art of War, study the code of Bushido, understand the difference between a fighter and a warrior. A fighter sought conflict. A warrior sought peace. A fighter proved their strength through domination. A warrior proved theirs through restraint. These principles had seemed noble and clear in the gym, with its smell of sweat and rubber, its walls decorated with motivational posters and pictures of legendary fighters. But in the harsh, fluorescent lights of Riverside High's hallways, with Madison's laughter ringing in her ears and the sting of daily humiliation fresh on her skin, those principles felt like chains. "Why don't you just fight back?" Elena asked herself as she lay in bed each night, replaying the day's humiliations like a horrible movie she couldn't turn off. She could easily handle all three girls without breaking a sweat. Madison might be queen of the school, but in a physical confrontation, she would crumble like paper. Jessica's designer clothes wouldn't protect her from a rear naked choke. Chloe would probably run at the first sign of real conflict. But each time these thoughts surfaced, Elena would remember other things too. The scholarship application sitting on her desk, waiting to be completed. Her mother's tired face as she counted out bills at the kitchen table. The future she was building, brick by brick, that could be destroyed by one moment of lost control. A fight would mean suspension, possibly expulsion. It would mean kissing goodbye any chance of college scholarships. It would mean proving to everyone that she was exactly what they thought. Violent, dangerous, one of those people. So Elena endured. She developed new routes through the school to avoid Madison's usual haunts. She started eating lunch in different teachers' classrooms, rotating to avoid becoming predictable. She learned to tune out the comments, to let the words wash over her like water off a duck's back. She told herself it was temporary, that in less than 2 years she would graduate and never have to see any of these people again. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon in late October, exactly 3 weeks after the coffee incident. The day had started badly. Elena had overslept after a particularly intense training session the night before, arriving at school just as the first period bell rang. She had no time to prepare mentally for the day, no time to put on her armor of indifference. Madison had been particularly vicious all week, perhaps sensing that Eleanor's defenses were weakening. The comments had become more personal, more targeted. Madison had somehow learned about Rosa's cleaning job and had been making increasingly cruel jokes about it. "Hey, Elena," she had called out in the hallway that morning. "My mom needs someone to clean our toilets. Think your mom's available? Oh, wait, she probably doesn't do houses as nice as ours. Might confuse her." By lunchtime, Elena was raw, her nerves exposed like live wires. She couldn't face the cafeteria, couldn't bear the thought of navigating that social minefield. Instead, she took her bagged lunch to the courtyard, a small outdoor space between buildings that was usually empty during the colder months. The October air was crisp, the trees surrounding the courtyard blazing with autumn colors. It was peaceful, quiet, exactly what Elena needed. She found a bench in the corner, partially hidden by a large oak tree whose branches stretched overhead like protective arms. Her lunch was simple, a turkey sandwich her mother had made the night before, an apple, a bottle of water. Elena ate slowly, savoring the solitude, letting the quiet wash away some of the morning's toxicity. The courtyard was relatively empty except for a few scattered students. A couple sat on a bench across the way, lost in each other. A group of freshmen huddled near the door, probably planning something for the Halloween dance the following week. Nobody paid attention to the quiet girl eating alone under the tree. Elena allowed herself to relax slightly, her shoulders dropping from their defensive hunch. She pulled out a book, The Count of Monte Cristo, which she was reading for the third time, and lost herself in Dante's elaborate revenge plot, finding vicarious satisfaction in his methodical destruction of those who had wronged him. She was so absorbed that she didn't hear the approaching footsteps until it was too late. The first indication of danger was a shadow falling across her book, followed by the sickeningly sweet smell of Madison's expensive perfume. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Madison said, sliding onto the bench across from Elena with the fluid grace of a predator. Jessica and Chloe flanked her, standing like guards. Eating all alone again. How pathetic. Elena's body tensed, her fight-or-flight response kicking into high gear, but she forced herself to remain still, to keep eating her sandwich as if Madison's presence meant nothing. Inside, her mind was racing, calculating escape routes, measuring distances, preparing for whatever was coming. "I'm talking to you," Madison said, her voice sharp with irritation at being ignored. "Didn't your mother teach you any manners? Oh wait, she's probably too busy scrubbing floors to teach you anything." Elena's jaw clenched, but she remained silent. She took another bite of her sandwich, chewing slowly, mechanically. The turkey tasted like cardboard in her mouth, but she forced herself to swallow. "You know what I think," Madison continued, her voice taking on a dangerous edge. She pulled out her phone, and Elena's stomach dropped. Madison recording something was never good. "I think it's time for a makeover. That greasy hair is really bringing down the school's image." Before Elena could react, Chloe grabbed her from behind. It wasn't a particularly skilled hold. Chloe grabbed her arms and pulled them back. But Elena was sitting down, her leverage compromised, and she had been caught completely off guard. She could have broken free easily, could have reversed the hold and put Chloe on the ground in seconds, but that would mean fighting, would mean crossing the line she had drawn for herself. Jessica produced a pair of scissors from her purse, large fabric scissors that gleamed in the afternoon sun. Elena's blood ran cold. Her hair. They were going after her hair. "Hold still," Madison commanded, grabbing a handful of Elena's beautiful hair with unnecessary roughness. "This is going to hurt. Well, it's going to hurt you anyway. I'm going to enjoy every second." Elena struggled then, genuinely struggled, but Chloe and Jessica had positioned themselves to make it look like they were just playing around to any casual observer. To anyone watching from a distance, it might have looked like friends goofing off, maybe practicing hairstyles for the upcoming dance. "Please," Elena said, hating herself for begging, but unable to stop. "Please don't do this." Madison laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "The mouse is begging." How perfect. "Maybe if you get on your knees, I'll consider it." Elena knew Madison was lying, knew that humiliating herself further wouldn't stop what was about to happen. But her hair, her beautiful hair that connected her to her grandmother, that was the one thing about her appearance she truly valued. She couldn't just let them take it without trying. The scissors cut through Elena's hair with sickening efficiency. Madison wasn't trying to give her a haircut. She was trying to destroy. Chunks of varying length fell to the concrete like black snow, some pieces long, others just an inch or two. Elena could feel the cold metal of the scissors against her scalp, could hear the sharp snip, snip, snip that seemed to echo in the quiet courtyard. Other students had gathered now, drawn by the commotion like moths to a flame. Some were filming with their phones, already imagining the social media likes they would get. Others just watched with the horrified fascination of witnessing a car crash. None intervened, none even protested. Elena saw faces she recognized in the crowd. David from her calculus class, who she had tutored for free when he was struggling. Sarah from biology, who had been her lab partner and had seemed friendly. Marcus from the school newspaper, who had interviewed her about her perfect GPA just last month. They all just stood there, witnesses to her humiliation, complicit in their silence. The cutting seemed to go on forever, though in reality it probably lasted less than a minute. Madison worked with vicious enthusiasm, making sure the damage was as complete as possible. When she finally stepped back, Elena's hair lay in ruins around the bench, black strands scattered like feathers from a destroyed bird. "There," Madison said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. She held up her phone, making sure she captured Elena's devastated face. "Much better. Now you look as ugly on the outside as you are on the inside." Elena sat frozen, her hand reaching up to touch the jagged remains of her hair. She could feel short tufts in some places, longer strands in others, gaps where Madison had cut almost to the scalp. Tears she had held back for months finally spilled down her cheeks, hot and shameful. She hated herself for crying, hated giving Madison the satisfaction, but she couldn't stop. The gathered crowd began to disperse, already moving on to the next entertainment, already uploading videos and photos to Instagram and Snapchat. The incident would be all over social media within minutes, Elena's humiliation preserved in digital amber for everyone to see and re-watch. "Don't cry, little mouse," Madison cooed mockingly, crouching down to Elena's level. "Hair grows back. Assuming your family can afford shampoo, maybe your mom can pick up some extra shifts cleaning toilets to pay for it." "Nah," Jessica laughed. That sharp, mean laugh that seemed to be her default response to Madison's cruelty. Even Chloe managed a weak chuckle, though Elena noticed she wasn't looking directly at her, was instead staring at the hair scattered on the ground with something that might have been regret. Madison stood, brushing imaginary dirt off her designer jeans. "Come on, girls. We've done our charity work for the day. We've helped make Riverside a more beautiful place." They walked away, their heels clicking on the concrete in perfect synchronization, leaving Elena alone with the wreckage of her dignity. The courtyard had emptied completely now, even the couple from across the way having fled the uncomfortable scene. Elena was alone with her shame and the scattered remains of her hair being lifted by the October wind. She sat there for a long time, unable to move, unable to think beyond the immediate horror of what had just happened. Her hair, her beautiful hair that she had been growing since she was a child, that her grandmother used to brush for her while telling stories of the old country, was gone. Destroyed in seconds by someone who had everything and still needed to take more. Eventually the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch period. Elena couldn't go to class, couldn't walk through those hallways with her butchered hair and tear-stained face. She gathered her things mechanically, her body moving on autopilot, and walked to the nurse's office. Mrs. Patterson, the school nurse, was a kind woman in her 50s who had seen every kind of teenage crisis imaginable. She took one look at Elena and immediately ushered her into the small back room reserved for students who needed privacy. "Oh, honey," she said softly, her eyes taking in the damage. "Who did this to you?" Elena couldn't speak, couldn't form the words. Mrs. Patterson didn't push, just handed her tissues and let her cry. She called Rosa, explaining that Elena wasn't feeling well and needed to go home. She didn't mention the hair, leaving that for Elena to explain. Rosa arrived within 20 minutes, having left work in the middle of her shift. She took one look at her daughter, and her face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, sorrow, before settling on a protective fury that Elena had rarely seen. "Who?" Rosa asked, her voice deadly quiet. "Who did this to you?" Elena told her everything on the drive home: months of harassment, the racist comments, the teachers who looked away, the final humiliation. Rosa listened without interruption, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, her jaw clenched so tight Elena worried she might crack a tooth. "We're going to the principal," Rosa said when Elena finished. "We're going to the police. This is assault." "No," Elena said quietly. "Please, Mom, it will just make things worse." Rosa looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Elena's face stopped her. Instead, she pulled out her phone and made a call Elena hadn't expected. "Miguel, it's Rosa. You need to come over. Now." Uncle Miguel arrived within the hour, his face dark with barely controlled rage when he saw Elena's destroyed hair. Elena had never seen him truly angry before. Annoyed, yes. Frustrated during training, certainly, but never this kind of deep, dangerous anger that seemed to radiate from him in waves. "Mija," he said softly when he finally spoke, his voice carefully controlled. "Who did this to you?" Elena told the story again, each retelling making it feel both more real and more surreal. Miguel listened without interruption. Though Elena could see his fists clenching and unclenching rhythmically, a fighter's tell that he was imagining violence. "Why didn't you defend yourself?" he asked finally. "You have the skills. You could have stopped them." "Because you taught me that fighting should be the last resort," Elena replied, her voice hollow. "A warrior protects others, never seeks conflict." Miguel was quiet for a long moment, and when he looked up, Elena was surprised to see tears in his eyes. "Mija, I failed you," he said quietly. "I taught you to be a warrior, but I forgot to teach you the most important lesson." He placed his hands on her shoulders and looked directly into her eyes. "Sometimes, the person who needs protecting is yourself. There's a difference between being a bully and refusing to be a victim. What happened to you today? That was assault. Those girls need to learn that actions have consequences." He stood, pulling out his phone. "I know someone, a barber, who owes me a favor. He's the best in the city. We're going to salvage what we can." The barber shop was in Miguel's neighborhood, a small place squeezed between a bodega and a laundromat. The owner, Carlos, was another former fighter, his arms covered in intricate tattoos that told the story of his career. He took one look at Elena's hair and whistled low. "Someone did a number on you, Pequeña," he said, gesturing for her to sit in his chair. "But don't worry, Carlos will fix you up. You're going to look like a warrior." For the next hour, Carlos worked his magic. He had to cut Elena's hair short, very short in some places, but he managed to turn the destruction into something deliberate, edgy, purposeful. The sides were buzzed close, while the top was left longer, styled in a way that looked both feminine and fierce. It was completely different from her long hair, but as Elena looked at her reflection, she realized she didn't hate it. "A warrior's haircut," Carlos said with satisfaction. "Sometimes we must lose something to find out who we really are." As Elena looked at her reflection, she saw something different in her eyes. The meek, frightened girl was gone, had been cut away with her hair. In her place stood someone who had finally had enough, someone who understood that there was a difference between keeping the peace and being a doormat. "Uncle Miguel," she said quietly, still staring at her reflection. "I think I understand now." Miguel nodded, his hand on her shoulder. "Monday will be different." "Monday will be different," Elena confirmed. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. Not physical preparation. Elena was more than ready for that, but mental. She spent hours with Miguel, not training but talking. working through scenarios, understanding the difference between aggression and assertion, between revenge and justice. "You're not going looking for a fight," Miguel explained during one of their sessions, "but if they bring the fight to you, you end it. Quickly, decisively, and with minimal damage. The goal isn't to hurt them, it's to show them that you won't be hurt anymore." They also talked about the likely consequences. There would probably be suspension, possibly worse. But Miguel had already made some calls. His friend Tony was a lawyer who specialized in discrimination cases. The videos of Elena's assault were already circulating on social media, clear evidence of what had been done to her. "If they want to make this about your response to being assaulted," Tony had explained over the phone, "we'll make it about the pattern of harassment and the school's failure to protect you. Trust me, they won't want that fight." Rosa was quieter about the whole thing, torn between her maternal instinct to protect her daughter and her understanding that Elena needed to stand up for herself. She spent the weekend alternating between hugging Elena and muttering angrily in Spanish about what she would do to Madison's parents if she ever met them. Sunday night, Elena stood in front of her mirror, practicing her stance, her presence. The girl looking back at her was a stranger. Short hair, straight spine, eyes that no longer looked away. She looked dangerous, but more importantly, she looked confident. "Tomorrow," she said to her reflection, "everything changes." Monday morning arrived like a storm front, the air itself seeming to crackle with electricity. Elena woke before her alarm, her body thrumming with nervous energy. She dressed carefully, not in her usual oversized sweater, but in fitted jeans and a simple black t-shirt that showed her athletic build. She was done hiding. Rosa hugged her before she left, whispering a prayer in Spanish and kissing her forehead. "Be safe, mija, but also be strong." Elena walked to school instead of taking the bus, needing the time to center herself. Each step felt deliberate, purposeful, like a warrior walking to battle. She thought of her grandmother, who had fled violence in her home country to build a better life here. She thought of her mother, who worked herself to exhaustion to provide for her family. She thought of all the quiet kids at Riverside who suffered in silence because they had no voice, no power. Today, she thought, I speak for all of us. She arrived at school just as the buses were unloading, walking through the main entrance with her head held high for the first time in months. The reaction was immediate. Students who had never noticed her before stopped and stared. Those who recognized her whispered to their friends, pointing at her transformed appearance. Elena ignored them all, walking directly to her locker with purposeful strides. She could feel the energy shifting around her, the social dynamics of the hallway realigning as people tried to understand this change. The mouse had become something else entirely, and nobody quite knew how to react. She had chemistry first period, the same class where she usually hid in the back corner. But today, she walked to a desk in the middle of the room, claiming space she had never dared occupy before. Mr. Patterson did a double take when he saw her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish before he apparently decided to pretend nothing had changed. The whispers followed her from class to class. Everyone had seen the videos from Friday, had watched her humiliation, but this wasn't the broken girl they expected to see. This was someone else, someone who looked like she might bite if provoked. Elena could feel Madison's absence like a void in the social fabric of the school. Usually by second period, the queen bee would have made her presence known, would have held court in the hallways. But Madison was nowhere to be seen, and her absence made everyone nervous. It was like waiting for a thunderstorm when you could already smell the rain in the air. Third period was English with Mrs. Robinson, and Elena took her usual seat by the window. She was reading ahead in their assigned novel when she heard the familiar click of heels in the hallway. Madison had arrived, The blonde girl swept into the classroom like she owned it, Jessica and Chloe trailing in her wake. She was dressed impeccably as always. Designer jeans, a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Elena's entire wardrobe, perfectly applied makeup that made her look like she had stepped out of a magazine. Madison's eyes found Elena immediately, and her perfectly glossed lips curved into a cruel smile. "Well, look who got a real haircut," she announced loudly, ensuring everyone in the class was paying attention. "Too bad it can't fix that face." Elena felt the familiar fire in her chest, but this time she didn't push it down. Instead, she let it fuel her, let it strengthen her resolve. She stood up slowly, deliberately, and turned to face Madison fully. "We need to talk," Elena said simply, her voice carrying a new authority that made several students sit up straighter. Madison laughed, but there was something uncertain in it now. The script had changed, and she wasn't sure of her lines anymore. "The little mouse wants to talk. How adorable. What could you possibly have to say to me?" "You're going to apologize," Elena said calmly, her voice steady and clear. "To me and to every other student you've tormented this year." The classroom was dead silent now, everyone holding their breath. Even Mrs. Robinson had stopped pretending to organize papers at her desk, watching the confrontation with poorly concealed interest. Madison's friends exchanged glances, unsure how to respond to this unprecedented challenge to their leader's authority. Jessica opened her mouth, probably to deliver some cutting remark, but Madison held up a hand to silence her. Madison stood up slowly, her smile turning vicious. "Or what? You'll cry on me? Run to your mommy? Or I'll make you apologize," Elena replied, her voice still eerily calm. The tension in the room was palpable, like the moment before lightning strikes. Students were pulling out their phones, sensing that whatever was about to happen would be worth recording. Madison's face flushed red with anger. How dare this nobody, this nothing, challenge her in front of everyone? She was Madison Pierce. Her father owned half the businesses in town. She had been homecoming queen, prom princess, the undisputed ruler of Riverside High's social hierarchy. She would not be challenged by some immigrant trash who couldn't even afford decent clothes. "You little—" she snarled, drawing back her hand to slap Elena. What happened next would be talked about for years at Riverside High, passed down from generation to generation like a legend. Elena moved with lightning speed, catching Madison's wrist mid-swing. Her grip was iron, her stance perfect, 3 points of contact maintaining her balance while controlling Madison's arm. Madison tried to pull away, but Elena's grip was unbreakable. The popular girl's eyes widened in shock and, for the first time, fear. She had expected Elena to cower, to take the slap like she had taken everything else. She hadn't expected resistance. "That was your choice," Elena said quietly, but her voice carried to every corner of the now silent classroom. Madison's free hand came up in a wild haymaker, all fury and no technique. Elena released Madison's wrist and flowed around the punch like water, using Madison's own momentum against her. It was a basic technique, one of the first things Miguel had taught her, but executed with the precision of years of practice. Madison stumbled forward, off balance, and Elena helped her along with a gentle push that sent the blonde girl sprawling across the floor. Madison's designer bag went flying, its contents scattering across the linoleum. Makeup, car keys, a packet of diet pills that she quickly scrambled to hide. "Get up," Elena said calmly. "We're not done." Madison pushed herself to her feet, her perfect hair now disheveled, her face red with humiliation and rage. "Jessica! Chloe! Do something!" Jessica stepped forward, loyalty overcoming common sense. She grabbed for Elena's arm, trying to restrain her so Madison could attack. But Elena had been expecting this. She executed a simple arm drag, a technique so basic it was taught to children in their first week of training. Jessica went stumbling past, her momentum carrying her into a cluster of desks with a crash. Chloe took one look at her fallen friends and backed away, hands raised in surrender. "I'm not part of this," she said quickly. "This is between you two." Madison was on her feet now, her humiliation transforming into blind rage. "You think you're tough," she spat. "You think you're something special. You're nothing. Your mother cleans toilets. Your family are probably all illegals. You're trash and everyone knows it." Elena felt the words hit her, felt them try to burrow under her skin like they had so many times before, but this time they found no purchase. She wasn't that scared girl anymore. She had been forged in fire, transformed by her trials into something stronger. "My mother works 2 jobs to support our family," Elena said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent classroom. "She's never stolen anything, never cheated anyone, never built her life on making others miserable. Can you say the same about your family?" The crowd gasped at the boldness of the comeback. Everyone knew Madison's father's dealerships were notorious for predatory lending practices, for taking advantage of people who couldn't afford to fight back. It was the kind of open secret that everyone knew but no one dared mention. Madison lunged forward with a scream of rage, all pretense of dignity abandoned. She tried to grab Elena's hair, forgetting that there was hardly any left to grab. Elena sidestepped easily and applied a gentle but effective standing choke, her arm wrapping around Madison's neck in a textbook rear naked choke position, but without actually applying pressure. "I could put you to sleep right now," Elena whispered in Madison's ear, quiet enough that only she could hear. "I could hurt you the way you've hurt so many others, but I won't, because I'm not you. I'm better than you." She released Madison, who stumbled forward, gasping and clutching her throat dramatically, even though Elena had barely applied any pressure. Madison's eyes were wild now, darting around the room, looking for support, for someone to take her side. But she found only phones recording, faces watching with a mixture of shock and, in some cases, satisfaction. "This isn't over," Madison wheezed. "My father will sue you. I'll have you expelled. I'll destroy you." Elena shook her head slowly. "No, you won't. Because if you do, everyone will see the videos of what you did to me on Friday. Everyone will hear about the months of harassment, the racist comments, the assault. Your father's business relies on his reputation in this community. How do you think the Latino community, which makes up 40% of this town, will react when they find out his daughter is a racist bully who assaults other students?" Madison's face went pale. She hadn't thought about that, hadn't considered that her actions might have consequences beyond the walls of Riverside High. Mrs. Robinson finally found her voice. "Everyone sit down. Now, Elena, Madison, report to the principal's office immediately." But before anyone could move, the door burst open. Principal Martinez stood there, his face grave. Behind him were 2 security guards and the school resource officer. "I've been informed of a disturbance," he said, his eyes taking in the scene. Madison disheveled and shaken, Jessica picking herself up from the floor, Elena standing calm and composed in the center of it all. "Everyone involved, come with me, now." As they filed out of the classroom, Elena caught sight of the other students' faces. Some looked shocked, others impressed, and a few, the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the bullied ones, looked something close to inspired. The long walk to the principal's office felt like a funeral procession. Madison tried to regain some of her composure, fixing her hair and straightening her clothes, but the damage was done. Her aura of invincibility had been shattered, and everyone had seen it happen. Principal Martinez's office was crowded. Besides the principal himself, there was Vice Principal Johnson, the school counselor Ms. Williams, the resource officer Deputy Chen, and surprisingly, Coach Williams, who must have been called in as a witness to previous incidents. "Sit," Principal Martinez commanded, gesturing to the chairs arranged in front of his desk. Madison immediately launched into her version of events, her voice high and frantic. "She attacked me, unprovoked. I was just sitting in class and she grabbed me, choked me. I want her arrested. I want—" "Ms. Pierce," Principal Martinez interrupted, his voice tired. "Before you continue, you should know that I've spent the weekend reviewing some disturbing footage that was brought to my attention." He turned his computer monitor around, and there it was. The video of Madison cutting Elena's hair, her laughing face clear and unmistakable as she destroyed something that had taken years to grow. Madison's face went white. We were just playing around." "Playing around?" Principal Martinez's voice was cold. "Is that what you call assault? Because that's what the police are calling it." "The police?" Madison's voice cracked. Deputy Chen spoke up. "Miss Vasquez's family filed a police report on Friday evening. Assault, harassment, and given some of the comments recorded, possible hate crime charges." Elena felt a surge of surprise. Her mother and uncle had filed a report without telling her. They had been protecting her, even as she prepared to protect herself. "Furthermore," Principal Martinez continued, "I've spent the morning interviewing students about a pattern of harassment that seems to have been going on for months. Would you like to hear some of the testimonies?" He pulled out a folder, thick with papers. "Amy Martinez reports that you called her pizza face every day for 3 months until she started skipping school. David Lim says you mocked his stutter so relentlessly that he stopped speaking in class entirely. Rebecca Jones tells me you poured chocolate milk on her because, and I quote, she already looked dirty anyway." With each testimony, Madison seemed to shrink in her chair. These weren't just Elena's accusations anymore. The floodgates had opened, and everyone who had been too afraid to speak up alone was finally being heard. "As for today's incident," Principal Martinez said, turning to Elena, "I have 13 different cell phone videos from 13 different angles, and while your response to Ms. Pierce's attempted assault was perhaps more skilled than expected, it's clear you were defending yourself." Coach Williams spoke up, surprising everyone. "I'd like to add that I've observed Ms. Pierce and her friends excluding and tormenting other students in my class all year. I should have done something about it sooner." Elena couldn't believe what she was hearing. Coach Williams, who had always looked the other way, was actually admitting fault? "Here's what's going to happen," Principal Martinez said, his voice brooking no argument. "Ms. Pierce, you are suspended immediately pending a full investigation. Given the evidence, I expect that suspension will become an expulsion. The school board will meet Thursday to make the final determination." "You can't do this," Madison shrieked. "My father—" "Your father has already been contacted," Principal Martinez interrupted. "He's on his way. I suspect he'll be more interested in damage control than in fighting this decision, especially when he learns about the potential criminal charges." He turned to Jessica. "Ms. Chen, you're suspended for 2 weeks and will be required to attend anger management counseling before you can return." Jessica nodded mutely, all her bravado gone. "Ms. Williams," the principal continued, looking at Chloe, "while you didn't participate in today's altercation, you were an accomplice to Friday's assault, 1 week suspension and mandatory counseling." Chloe looked relieved that her punishment wasn't worse. Finally, Principal Martinez turned to Elena. "Ms. Vasquez, while I understand you were provoked and defending yourself, fighting is still against school policy. You'll receive a 3-day in-school suspension, which you'll serve in the library helping Mrs. Henderson with cataloging." Elena almost smiled. 3 days in the library was hardly a punishment. "Additionally," the principal continued, "I'm recommending you for our peer mediation program. It seems you have skills that could be useful in helping other students resolve conflicts, hopefully before they escalate to this level." As they filed out of the office, Madison suddenly turned to Elena, her face twisted with rage and desperation. "This isn't over," she hissed. "I'll make you pay for this, you and your whole family." Elena met her gaze steadily. "No, you won't, because you're done here. Your reign of terror is over, and everyone knows it." Madison's father arrived then, his face red with anger, though whether at his daughter or the situation was unclear. He took one look at Principal Martinez's stern face, Deputy Chen's uniform, and his daughter's tear-stained face, and seemed to age 10 years in an instant. "We'll be in touch," he said stiffly, grabbing Madison's arm and practically dragging her from the office. The rest of the day passed in a blur. News of the confrontation spread through the school like wildfire. Videos were shared and reshared, each viewing adding to the legend. Elena, the quiet girl who had been invisible for so long, had stood up to the Queen Bee and won. But more importantly, Elena's stand had inspired others. By the end of the day, a dozen more students had come forward with stories of Madison's bullying. The administration, finally forced to confront what they had ignored for so long, announced a school-wide assembly on bullying for the following week. Elena's 3-day in-school suspension turned out to be almost pleasant. Mrs. Henderson was delighted to have help in the library, and they worked in companionable silence, organizing books and updating the catalog system. Students would occasionally peek in, some giving her thumbs up, others just staring in awe at the girl who had taken down Madison Pierce. On the second day of her suspension, an unexpected visitor appeared. Chloe Williams stood in the library doorway looking uncertain. "Can I talk to you?" she asked quietly. Elena nodded, gesturing to a chair across from her. Chloe sat down, fidgeting with her hands. "I wanted to apologize," she said finally. "Not just for Friday, but for everything. I knew it was wrong. I knew we were hurting people, but I was too much of a coward to stand up to Madison." Elena studied her for a moment. "Why didn't you?" Chloe's eyes filled with tears. "Because I was terrified of becoming a target myself. Madison, she wasn't always like that, you know. We were friends in elementary school, real friends. But when her family got rich, when she became popular, she changed, and I held on, thinking maybe the old Madison would come back. But she never did." "She made her choices," Elena said simply, "and you made yours." "I know," Chloe said, wiping her eyes. "And I have to live with that. But I wanted you to know that I'm sorry, and thank you for standing up to her, for doing what I should have done a long time ago." After Chloe left, Elena sat in the quiet library, thinking about choices and consequences, about strength and weakness, about the different forms courage could take. Thursday came, and with it the school board meeting. Elena wasn't required to attend, but her mother and uncle insisted on going to show support. The meeting was packed, standing room only, with parents and students and community members all wanting to have their say. Madison's father tried to defend his daughter, talking about her academic achievements, her extracurricular activities, the stress she was under. But when video after video was shown, when testimony after testimony was read, his defense crumbled. The board voted unanimously for expulsion. As the Pierce family left the meeting, Madison caught Elena's eye one last time. But instead of anger, Elena saw something else there, defeat, perhaps even a flicker of understanding. Madison had learned too late that actions have consequences, that the power she had wielded so carelessly could be taken away just as easily. Elena's return to regular classes the following Monday was met with something she had never experienced before: respect. Students who had ignored her before now nodded in acknowledgement as she passed. Some even approached to thank her, sharing their own stories of Madison's cruelty. The girl who had once eaten lunch alone now found herself surrounded by students who wanted to sit with her. The chess club president invited her to join their team. The school newspaper wanted to interview her about standing up to bullying. Even some of the teachers looked at her differently, with a mixture of respect and perhaps a little shame for not having protected her sooner. Elena was polite but selective about the attention, choosing to spend time with other quiet students who had been overlooked by the social hierarchy. She started a self-defense club for girls, teaching basic techniques that could help them protect themselves. Uncle Miguel came in as a guest instructor, and within a month, the club had 40 members. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Elena was surprised to find Madison waiting by her car after school. The formerly popular girl looked different, humbled, her designer clothes replaced by simple jeans and a sweater, her perfect makeup replaced by a clean, natural face. "I wanted to apologize," Madison said quietly, not meeting Elena's eyes. "What I did to you, what I did to a lot of people, it was wrong." Elena studied her former tormentor carefully. Madison looked smaller somehow, diminished by the loss of her social status and the consequences of her actions. "Why?" Elena asked simply. "Why did you do it?" Madison was quiet for a long moment. "Because I was scared," she finally admitted. "Scared that if I wasn't on top, I'd end up on the bottom. My parents, they always told me that winning was everything, that being second was the same as losing. So I hurt people to make myself feel powerful, to make sure everyone knew I was the winner." Elena nodded slowly. "And now?" "Now I know what it feels like to be powerless," Madison replied, finally meeting Elena's eyes. "To have everyone turn against you, to be the one people whisper about, laugh at, avoid. I'm transferring to St. Catherine's Academy next week. Private school. My parents think it will be a fresh start." "Will it be?" Elena asked. Madison shrugged. "I don't know. But I wanted you to know that I'm sorry, Elena. I'm truly sorry. I know it doesn't undo what I did, but I needed to say it." Elena looked into Madison's eyes and saw genuine remorse there. "Apology accepted," she said finally. "But being sorry isn't enough. You need to do better." Madison nodded eagerly. "I will. I am. I've been volunteering at the community center, working with kids who are being bullied. My counselor thought it would help me understand the impact of what I did, and it has. Those kids, some of their stories." She trailed off, shaking her head. "I was a monster." "You were a bully," Elena corrected. "Monsters can't change. People can." As Elena watched Madison walk away, she felt a sense of closure she hadn't expected. The girl who had once seemed like an unstoppable force of cruelty was revealed to be just another scared teenager, lashing out at the world because she didn't know how else to cope with her own fears and insecurities. Uncle Miguel had been right about more than just self-defense. He had taught her that true strength came not from the ability to hurt others, but from the courage to protect yourself and those who couldn't protect themselves. He had taught her that sometimes the greatest victory was showing mercy to a defeated enemy, that transformation was possible even for those who seemed irredeemable. The transformation at Riverside High was gradual but undeniable. The administration, shaken by the realization of how badly they had failed their students, implemented sweeping changes. Teachers received training on recognizing and addressing bullying. A zero-tolerance policy was put in place, with real consequences for harassment. Support groups were created for students who had been victims of bullying. Elena became something of a reluctant hero to the underdog students. She never sought the attention, but she didn't shy away from helping others who were being picked on either. Her calm confidence and proven ability to stand up for herself made potential bullies think twice before targeting anyone. The self-defense club grew from 40 members to over 100. Elena taught not just physical techniques, but the philosophy behind them. that strength should be used to protect, not to dominate. She shared Uncle Miguel's wisdom about choosing battles, about the difference between assertiveness and aggression, about the responsibility that came with power. Some of Madison's former victims found their voices through the club. Amy Martinez, who had been mocked for her acne, became one of Elena's assistant instructors. David Lim, whose stutter Madison had mocked, joined the debate team and found that when he felt confident, his stutter almost disappeared. Rebecca Jones, who had been tormented for her second-hand clothes, started a clothing swap program that helped students share resources without shame. As winter turned to spring, Elena found herself elected to student council as vice president. She hadn't even run. Students had written her name in. She used the position to advocate for the overlooked students, to ensure that the changes in the school's culture weren't just temporary, but became permanent. She also found unexpected friendships. Sarah from biology became a close friend, admitting that she had wanted to help during the haircutting incident, but had been paralyzed by fear. Marcus from the newspaper became a regular lunch companion, their conversations ranging from philosophy to pop culture. Even some of the formerly popular kids, freed from Madison's toxic influence, turned out to be decent people who had just been caught up in a bad dynamic. One day in late spring, as Elena was tutoring in the library, Mrs. Henderson approached her with an envelope. "This came for you," the librarian said with a knowing smile. Elena opened it to find a letter from the State Martial Arts Association. Uncle Miguel had submitted her story, with her permission, for their annual Courage Award, given to students who exemplified the values of martial arts in their daily lives. She had won. The award ceremony was held at the state capitol, with hundreds of martial artists from across the state attending. Elena stood on the stage, looking out at the sea of faces, and spoke about her journey. She talked about the difference between being peaceful and being passive, between avoiding fights and refusing to be a victim. She talked about the responsibility that came with strength and the courage it took to stand up, not just for yourself, but for others. "I spent months being afraid," she said, her voice carrying through the auditorium. "Afraid of being noticed, afraid of being targeted, afraid of fighting back. But I learned that fear is a choice, and so is courage. Every day we choose whether to stand up or stand by, whether to speak out or stay silent, whether to be victims or survivors." The audience erupted in applause, but Elena wasn't finished. "But I also learned about forgiveness," she continued. "The person who hurt me most, who took something precious from me, came to apologize, and I realized that holding on to anger would only make me like her. True strength isn't just about defending yourself. It's about knowing when to show mercy, when to allow for redemption." Uncle Miguel was crying when she came off stage, pulling her into a bear hug. "Your grandmother would be so proud," he whispered. "You've become everything a true warrior should be." Graduation approached with the inevitability of summer. Elena had been accepted to several universities with full scholarships, her essay about overcoming adversity apparently making quite an impression on admissions committees. She chose State University, which had an excellent pre-med program and, not coincidentally, a renowned martial arts team. The graduation ceremony was held on a perfect June evening, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Elena sat with her classmates, no longer in the back trying to be invisible, but in the middle, surrounded by friends. When her name was called to receive her diploma, the applause was thunderous. Students who had once looked away when she was being tormented now stood and cheered. Even some of the teachers looked emotional, perhaps remembering the quiet girl who had hidden in the back of their classrooms and comparing her to the confident young woman walking across the stage. In her graduation speech as salutatorian, Elena didn't mention Madison by name, but she spoke about transformation. "High school teaches us many things," she said. looking out at the sea of caps and gowns. Algebra, chemistry, literature. But the most important lessons aren't found in textbooks. We learn about courage from those who stand up when it would be easier to stay silent. We learn about strength from those who protect others when they could simply protect themselves. We learn about redemption from those who choose to change when they could remain the same. She paused, finding faces in the crowd, her mother, tears streaming down her face, Uncle Miguel, proud and stoic, even Chloe, who had returned from her suspension a changed person and had spent the rest of the year trying to make amends. We all have the power to be heroes or villains in someone else's story, Elena continued. Every day, we make choices that define not just who we are, but who others can become. A single act of cruelty can destroy someone's confidence, but a single act of courage can inspire hundreds to find their own strength. She talked about the ripple effects of standing up, how one person refusing to be a victim could inspire others to find their voices. She talked about the self-defense club, which had grown to include students from other schools. She talked about the changes at Riverside High, how a place that had once been ruled by fear had become a community built on mutual respect. And so, as we leave these halls, Elena concluded, I challenge each of you to be the hero in someone's story. Stand up for those who can't stand for themselves. Speak for those who have no voice. And remember that true strength isn't measured in who you can defeat, but in who you can lift up. The applause was deafening. As Elena returned to her seat, she caught a glimpse of someone in the back of the auditorium. Madison stood there, having somehow gotten into the ceremony despite no longer being a student. Their eyes met across the distance, and Madison nodded once, her acknowledgement, perhaps an apology, maybe even a thank you, before turning and disappearing into the evening. That summer passed in a blur of preparation for college, training at Miguel's gym, and teaching at the self-defense club, which had become a permanent program that would continue even after Elena left. She was passing the torch to Amy Martinez, who had found her confidence and her calling in helping others find theirs. The night before Elena left for college, Miguel held a special ceremony at the gym. In Brazilian jiu-jitsu, the black belt isn't just about skill, it's about character, about embodying the principles of the art. Elena had been technically ready for years, but Miguel had waited, wanting her to understand that true mastery went beyond physical technique. You've shown that you understand what it means to be a warrior, he said, tying the black belt around her waist as the gym erupted in cheers. You've used your strength to protect, your skills to inspire, and your spirit to transform not just yourself, but your entire community. Elena touched the black belt, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. From the scared girl hiding behind her hair to the confident young woman ready to take on the world. From the victim to the protector. From the silent to the voice for others. Thank you, Uncle, she said, her voice thick with emotion, for teaching me that being strong isn't about never falling down. It's about always getting back up and helping others do the same. As Elena packed for college, she found herself holding the box of newspaper clippings her mother had saved. Stories about the confrontation, about the changes at Riverside High, about the award she had won. But the one that meant the most to her was a small article from the local paper. Just a paragraph, really, mentioning that Madison Pierce had been elected president of the anti-bullying club at her new school. Elena smiled, remembering something else Miguel had taught her. The greatest victory is not in defeating your enemy, but in turning them into an ally. She closed the box and placed it in her suitcase, ready to start the next chapter of her story. She touched her hair, which had grown out into a stylish bob that she had decided to keep. It was a reminder of where she had been and how far she had come. The girl who had once hidden behind her hair now stood tall and proud, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. She had learned the most important lesson of all. Respect isn't something you beg for or demand. It's something you command through your actions, your choices, and your character. As she looked in the mirror one last time before leaving for college, Elena didn't see a victim or even a survivor. She saw a warrior, someone who had been tested by fire and emerged stronger, someone who had learned that true power came not from the ability to hurt others, but from the courage to protect, the wisdom to forgive, and the strength to transform adversity into triumph. The drive to State University was long, giving Elena time to reflect on everything that had happened. Rosa drove, occasionally reaching over to squeeze her daughter's hand, still marveling at the transformation she had witnessed. "Mija," Rosa said as they neared the campus, "your father would have been proud." Elena had rarely heard her mother mention her father since he left. "Really?" "He was a fighter too," Rosa said softly. "But he fought the wrong battles, against the wrong enemies. He fought himself, mostly. But you learned to fight the right way, for the right reasons. You became everything he could have been if he had been stronger." As they pulled into the university, Elena saw other freshmen and their families unloading cars, everyone nervous and excited about the new beginning. She thought about Madison, starting over at a new school, trying to become someone better. She thought about all the students at Riverside who would have a different high school experience because someone had finally stood up and said, "Enough." Change, Elena realized, wasn't just possible. It was inevitable. The only question was whether you would be the catalyst for that change or simply be changed by it. She had chosen to be the catalyst, and in doing so had discovered that the power to transform her world had been inside her all along. She just needed to find the courage to use it. The last thing Elena did before entering her dorm was send a text to Madison, whose number she had gotten from Chloe. It was simple, just 5 words, but it carried the weight of everything that had passed between them and everything that might yet be. "Good luck, make it count." Madison's response came back almost immediately. "I will. Thank you for everything." Elena smiled, pocketed her phone, and walked into her future, ready for whatever battles lay ahead, knowing that she had already won the most important one, the battle for her own soul, her own strength, her own story. At Riverside High, her legend would live on, passed down from class to class, evolving with each telling. The quiet girl who found her voice, the victim who became a protector, the mouse who revealed herself to be a lion. But for Elena, walking into her new life, she was simply herself, stronger for her struggles, wiser for her victories, and ready to write the next chapter of a story that was far from over. The transformation was complete. But the journey, the real journey, had just begun.